Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am truly delighted to invite Jacqueline Wales back to the podcast. Last time she shared her life's journey and career with us. Today, we're going to talk about her book that just came out, Fear Intelligence, a Practical Framework for Leading Beyond Fear. Jacqueline is an author, executive coach, and founder of transformational leadership programs that have impacted thousands of professionals worldwide. And her book distills 20 plus years of coaching experience and personal transformation into a practical guide for leaders ready to convert their fears into fuel for extraordinary results. So please join me in welcoming Jacqueline Wales back to Work from the Inside Out. Welcome back, Jacqueline.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, Tammy. This is a delight. Thank you for the conversations always.
Yeah, I'm really, really happy to have you. And I'm really excited about this work that you've been doing with and creating with Fear Intelligence. You've been working with fear for a long time. You've written several books about it from a number of angles, and it's really evolved. And in some ways, I'd say, I don't know if I'm right about this, but it's matured. It makes me think of like a fine wine in some ways. I don't know why I just said that, but that's how I think of it. It's really developed and deepened, in my opinion. And you've developed a framework and the fear intelligence system. So there's lots of ways for people to work with this. So take us back a little bit to where you started with this work and the books you wrote before. You've written several books about this, and what took you to developing fear intelligence.
You know, the fear intelligence piece is really the culmination of 20 years of really taking a hard look at fear, working with executives, individuals, entrepreneurs, scientists, all kinds of people on their key issues of behavioral avoidance, shall we say. And 9 times out of 10, when we look at behavior, you find fears right behind it. And it was informed really by my own journey, my own life journey, in fact, because I had to really confront a lot of my own fears. And when I first wrote, my first book was The Fearless Factor. And when I wrote that book, to be perfectly honest with you, it was written as a credibility factor. That was it, because I had suddenly found myself without means for the first time in many, many years, and I had to find a job. Well, that job became a coach. Friends suggested become a coach. But because I had no corporate background, I had no real professional credentials to point to, another friend said, write a book. You've already written a book. You could go do another one. So I was like, okay, fine. So I wrote The Fearless Factor, and I invited 12 women to share their stories of being fearless. And I told my story of the fears that had impacted my life. And people got it. People found it to be really interesting because I was, my style is very conversational, very raw. I tend to put it out there. So anyways, that was the first book. Started speaking about it, started coaching on it. And a few years later, after working with a lot of managers, I decided that too many of them were lacking in self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And you know this from Work from the Inside Out. You meet this on a lot of occasions.
Yeah.
So I wrote The Fearless Factor at work. And I talked about all the different elements of not only fear, but the ways in which we build greater self-awareness. So these were the first 2 books. But when it came to writing this particular book, Fear Intelligence, this became a whole different journey. This was like bringing together all of the ways in which I'd been thinking about fear behaviors, all the ways I had coached people through fear behaviors, all the ways in which I started to think of fear, which I had used in my TEDx talk couple of years ago that fear is one of the greatest motivating forces in human nature because it literally forces you to take a hard look at what it is you're trying to avoid. What is it that continually sabotages your best interests? What is it that you continually do to yourself? And you do it to yourself, frankly. The the types of thinking and behavior that gets in the way. Because after all, fear simply is the stories we tell ourselves. It is based on our thinking, and our thinking creates behaviors. And many times that fear didn't start yesterday, it started back maybe in your childhood. And even beyond that, intergenerationally, and I talk about that in Fear Intelligence also, is that we inherit a lot of our fear patterns from the people who were given the job of trying to raise us, and they had their own fears going on, and they get it transferred over. I'll give you an example of that, for instance. I'm in a workshop which I was giving on fear intelligence just the other week. And this woman says, I spend every night terrified that my 18-year-old daughter is going to get into some kind of trouble. She goes out at night. She doesn't seem to care. She'll show up on her friend's doorstep at midnight and it's dark. And, what could happen to her? This was her fear talking. And I said to her, how realistic is that? Do you have evidence that your daughter has been threatened? No. Well, by the time we were done with my 3-hour workshop, she realized that she had to give that up because not only was it undermining her daughter's sense of security and safety, but it was absolutely destroying her peace of mind. And that was a critical factor. So that kind of leads into the fear framework, which is you've got to, number one, face it. You got to face your fears and you've got to be able to take a hard look at them and ask yourself the hard questions. And we're going to get into the fear framework shortly. But, this was just an example of how fear runs the show.
Mm-hmm.
Why it destroys lives. And if it's intergenerational, this mother was giving her daughter the message that life is not safe.
Right. This is a really good point, and I'm curious about, and I don't know whether, this is part of the message too, is fear can also, this is something I write about in my book, fear, friend or foe. And I say it's both because obviously there are times where fear kicks in and it can rescue us, or it can protect us, or it can be, cautionary. But I know what you're talking about. There's that thread of fear that starts to take on a life of its own that limits us or takes us somewhere that doesn't serve us. And then there's those momentary, you know, moments of fear. You go to cross the street and there's a car coming and you should be afraid not to cross the street, right? So there's it I think we're not saying here that all fear is bad. It's but it's about that awareness and calibrating that awareness of that's what fear intelligence is the calibration of self-awareness around fear and how are we really what's our relationship with fear, right?
Well, I think that's the key issue is what is your relationship with fear? I know from my own story, my relationship with fear started at a very early age because I grew up in poverty and I grew up with violence and alcoholism and a whole slew of other negative impacts. Dysfunctional family, we had it in spades. But what does that do to you as an individual? Well, it destroys your sense of self-esteem and it definitely leads to behavioral patterns that are not healthy.
Yeah.
And so when we have the ability to look at that and ask, what is the driver for this? What are you avoiding? It becomes a key question.
Yeah.
Then we have to take the time to really dive into that one.
Yeah. And when you start to unpack those questions, it takes you somewhere that can unlock, some of the things that might be getting in the way of you living the life that you really want to live.
Well, this is it. And here's the other thing. If you say to somebody, what is the life you really want to live? Well, I want to be happy. I want to be successful. I want to be, live my life with some satisfaction. Okay, so yeah. And what will it take for that to happen? What do you have to remove from your life in order for that to be true?
Or what do you need to add, right? What are you holding off on or
But I'll be honest with you, the first
yeah,
part of that is, what do you have to remove?
yeah.
What do you have to let go of in order for some of that to be true? And when you let go of something, you make space. And when you make space, other stuff comes in. That's really the bottom line on
Yeah.
it. So you can't keep adding to whatever it is without taking a look at the crud that's lingering underneath, frankly. You got to clean the closet. That's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
clean the closet. Get rid of the old stuff. Then you make
Well,
room.
and a lot of it is, like you said, the stories, the beliefs, the things that a lot of those things run through our minds almost in a way that they're on automatic pilot. Sometimes I think a lot of times we're not even aware that those
Mhm.
things are running us. And
That's right.
so, are there ways that we can start to really let those things surface so we actually notice them when they're getting in the way?
Well, that's what the Fear Intelligence book is all about.
Well, how about that? So tell us more. Tell us more about the framework and what you offer us in your fabulous book.
Well, the Fear Intelligence is really about, get smart about your fear. And I will just start by saying this. Most people know about emotional intelligence. It's a pretty standard thing these days. Daniel Goleman's done a great job for 30 years in helping companies and individuals to understand why it's important.
Yeah.
But here's my take on it. The biggest emotional blockage that most people have is called fear,
Mhm.
and nobody's addressing it. So I'm aligning fear intelligence with emotional intelligence because when you have both of those going on, then you truly can understand your own emotions and understand the emotions of others and how it's impacting society as a whole. That becomes the piece that we're trying to tap into here. So that was one of the reasons why fear intelligence came to be. The
Mhm.
other piece was called the FEAR framework, and FEAR is an acronym. Now, we know that we've heard the acronym of false expectations appearing real. But what I like to say is my acronym stands for face it, explore it, act on it, and rise with it. Now, I will just say right off the bat, it's not a four-step program that transforms you into someone who's figured it out, because that's not actually very realistic. It's not a system that eliminates existential anxiety or delivers you to some final destination, because the truth of the matter is there's no there.
Right.
It's a journey. It's a
Right.
journey. And
Yeah.
even at this point in time, I'm still on my own journey. People often say to me, well, are you fearless? And I've been called fearless. And I go, I used to say, be fearless, see where it gets you. But I've now realized, and I wrote this in the book, there's no such thing as being fearless. What there is being fear intelligent. And
Mm.
that's really where I'm coming for. So, the fear steps of this framework. Number one is face.
Mhm.
Face your fear. And it isn't about being brave, by the way. It's
Ah.
about being honest.
Mhm.
Get honest with yourself. Most people spend enormous energy avoiding the questions that fear is asking. They stay busy. They chase distractions. They tell themselves they'll deal with it later or that they don't have an issue.
Or they tell themselves, "I don't have a choice. I have to stick with this job because of the benefits or the salary. I've got all these people to take care of, and, I couldn't possibly consider a new job or a different situation." It just, they give all kinds of meaning to making a change when they haven't even tried to look at what might be possible out there.
And that comes back to the question of what are you avoiding?
You're right,
Because
exactly.
when we can sit down and ask ourselves and really just stop for a moment, sit with the discomfort.
Mm.
refuse to let the noise drown out the signal because fear is the signal. And
Yes.
that's a key piece right there. It's like an alarm going off. When fear shows up in your life, there's your alarm. It's going off. What is it telling you?
Yeah.
So you have to stop and ask yourself, what is this about?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't just sit down and go, oh, well, it's that, and then move on. You gotta ask yourself again and again, ask the deeper questions. When I wrote my first book, I worked with a story coach on it, and he would read what I'd been writing, and then he would say, what about this matters?
Ah,
And that became the driving question. And every scene I wrote in that book, and it was a novel, was based on what about this matters? How about why? I mean, Simon Sinek's thing about, get your why. But I think the more important question is always going to be, what about this matters?
which can get you to the why, but
Absolutely,
you
it can
can't
get you
just
to the
jump to
why.
the why. What about this matters is a great way to really unpack that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So don't just tell me your why, tell me what about that matters, and then we can go from there. So when you're facing your discomfort, when you're facing the stories you tell yourself, when you're facing that deep sense of there's more to this than I'm actually getting at this moment,
Mhm.
you understand that it's a practice. It's not
Mm.
an achievement. It's not a there. It is
Right,
simply about being able to sit there with it and ask yourself the questions.
right.
And many times you don't know what the questions are, in which case, go find a coach. Go find somebody who will ask you the questions that you haven't been asking yourself. Get somebody who's going to help you to be honest with yourself. Of
Right.
course, that's what you and I do for a living.
I
So,
was gonna say, I know a couple of good coaches that they can reach out to. But, there's another thing that comes to mind that, what about this matters? I was thinking sometimes I tell people, use the "so what" test, which I think what about this matters is better, but also to say, "So what? What if I don't do anything about this? Would I be okay if I
yes,
leave things as they are right now?" And most people would say, No, I guess I wouldn't be okay with that." So then you go back to, well, then what about this matters? Right?
yes, yeah. And here's the other thing. Once you start seeing the patterns that are running your life,
Yeah,
you can't not see them anymore.
that's right. Yeah.
And so then the bigger question becomes, so what do you want to do about it? I mean, as I'd say this to my clients all the time, once they start getting the ahas, I'll go, okay, fine. Well, now that you've seen it, now that you know what's driving it, what's your next point of action? And,
And that's explore it, right?
let's explore it. So, exploring is really asking, what is your fear revealing to you?
Mm,
So, for instance, let's talk about approval, for instance. It's
yeah.
a big one. I hear this all the time. What is the need for approval all about? It's validation. It's
Yeah.
telling me that I'm okay.
Mhm.
Tell me that I'm doing okay. Tell me that who I am matters.
That's right.
And that is a key issue around fear because I'm a people pleaser. I
Mhm.
will spend endless hours making sure that you're happy so that you don't come back to me and tell me how much I don't contribute to your life or the ways in which I'm not adequate. And you're definitely, I want to stay out of that space of confirming my own personal bias.
Mhm.
And that is usually around I'm not good enough, I'm not capable, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, I'm not valued, I'm not respected. The nots go on forever.
And often those go on to the point where they're very subconscious and we don't even realize we're saying those things to ourselves.
It's absolutely. And here's the thing, it's a bit like your CPU in the back in the computer running, and it's running the show and it keeps everything up and active kind of thing. But there is a piece here that is when you stop that, when you stop the noise,
Hmm.
And remember, fear is a signal. And all of that distraction, all of that inner dialogue, all of that is the noise that you create in your life. What happens when you stop to explore that? It's scary. And I'll tell you why. A lot of people believe their own bullshit to the point that if I have to expand on this or explore it,
Yeah.
I'll find out that my bullshit is true.
Mm.
Instead of which, what they find out is, boy, what a lot of crock I've been doing for myself over the years.
Yeah.
The limitations of who I am is simply based on the stories you tell yourself. And I'll give you an example of that in my own life. For years, people would say to me, this was during the last 20 years, people would say, you have such a big personality and you have so much to give, but you keep playing small. And I would go, no, I'm not. I'm pushing the envelope. I'm trying my best. I'm getting out there. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that there was much, much more that I could be doing. That's why this book, Fear Intelligence, has come about, because it's like, nope, I'm fully out there now. I'm talking about what matters, why it matters, and based on my experience, my wisdom, and these years of working with people, I can tell you this stuff means something significant.
So would that be your acting on it now?
Now we're into the acting on it. So you choose to take some action. But this is where it gets hard
Yeah.
because you're at a crossroads with choosing discomfort over comfort
Mm-hmm.
because there's no guarantee ever that you're making the right choices. Never. And that brings me into the uncertainty piece where people want to have control over their life. If I
Right.
have control over my life, I am safe. But there's no way of guaranteeing that you're on the right path. You have to be able to take the risk that everything you're doing is leading you where you need to go. And that piece of uncertainty right there, that limitation, is where most people will stop. I could be wrong. I mean, I hear this from CEOs all the time. It's like, we won't take the risk because I'm not sure it's going to work out.
Mm.
But where are you with innovation? Where are you in creating a bigger picture of what it is you're looking for? That all stops if you're not willing to act on this and choose that space of discomfort.
Yeah. And yet I think there's, and this is probably different for different people, but I can speak from my own experience, and I think this will be relatable to people listening. There's that choice point where you decide to take action even though you're uncomfortable. But it's that fear that makes you feel it's that fear that feels kind of exciting and jittery versus that fear that feels like you're going to freeze up and be paralyzed. And there's a real difference. There's that
Yes.
fear of trying something that feels more threatening, and then there's that fear that feels more like excitement, like I really don't know where this is going, but I'll regret it if I don't give it a try. And and my instincts are telling me that it's worth the risk to throw myself into this, or it's worth the risk to thoughtfully throw myself into this. And that oftentimes has worked out for me. Or if it doesn't, at least I can look at it and say, I am glad I tried. And so the fear that went into that feels very, very different than the fear that shrinks us back.
No question. And I'm with you on that. In fact, I was in a workshop many years ago where the guy said, fear is the sharp edge of excitement. And I heard that and I went, ooh, is that why I've been living on the edge all my life?
And I would imagine that each of us has a different kind of calibration, on a scale, where we sit, with those kinds of feelings. I mean, some people are more risk averse than others, of course. But where does the equation then shift from choosing to take action, choosing to go into that discomfort and then rising.
So when you're rising, it's never about arriving at a destination.
Right,
It's not about becoming fearless, as I mentioned earlier,
right.
or perfectly aligned with where you should be in your life. It means that you've taken the opportunity to recognize the crossroads that you're at and treat it seriously so that you're actually betting on yourself as you
Yes.
go forward, because there's no guarantees. We mentioned that in the last piece. So you're choosing consciously to take action and live
Yeah.
with the consequences without running into regret or blame.
So sort of what I was talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't rise once, you rise again and again, and you
Sure.
rise, you fall, you rise again, and you just keep getting up. It's the old Zen koan of, you fall down 7 times and you get back up again.
7 times.
And that's it. I mean, I used to say that, perseverance is really one of the key elements of success, is that no matter how much we fail, and this is a big one for a lot of people. When I ask them, what's your greatest fear? They'll tell me fear of failure. And I say, okay, well, here's the deal on failure. It's a choice, an expectation, or a decision that did not go the way you had planned.
Right.
That's it. There's nothing more to say about it, because we're all failing our way to success on a certain level. And that means that you fall down and you get back up again.
Yeah.
Because if you fall down and you stay down, well, you might as well just call it quits. And here's the thing about this is that, people don't really want to see that there's an end of a road. They want to know that there's more to whatever it is. I
Yeah.
mean, we live a life that is finite. Let's face it. We none of us knows what life expectancy we have. So why are we wasting so much of our time worrying about what other people are thinking, worrying about what other people are doing, or what other people are going to do to us? And how we are activated by living up to other people's expectations of who we're supposed to be, instead of living authentically as who you are and who you've taken the time to explore through this face it, explore it, act on it, and rise with it. You take that framework, which, as I said, is not a finite system. It is simply a process by which you can start to consciously live your life with meaning and purpose, and live it more true to yourself than you've ever been.
And I wanna add to what you're saying, because something else that you write about that I think is helpful, especially to those people who maybe are more data driven or concrete thinkers. If you think about your fear as data, information, and then decide, what am I going to do with this information? How do I want to act on this information? Rather than just being consumed with the energy of it, but really kind of almost put it in a bucket in front of you and look at it in that way, right? And say, okay, I have this fear. It's my data. I'm going to work with this data. What do I want to do about it? Right? And I think that that is a good context for some people to start to work with it, work through it.
Yeah. So if we take one of the most common fears that I hear is, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at that one for a moment. And God knows I felt that way for years, constantly trying to validate myself, constantly over delivering, locked into perfectionism, really overworking, overdoing, never leaving anything alone. Even my husband would say that, just leave it alone. You don't have to touch it again. It's fine. And you're in that mode of thinking, as I've got to do more, and the I'm not good enough stuff tends to push that envelope. And I don't care whether you're a CEO or whether you're a lowly entry level person. It's the same mentality, frankly. You're out there trying to prove yourself. So then you have to stop and ask yourself, what are you trying to prove? Is it that you're trying to avoid people telling you that you're useless, that you're not capable, that you're not contributing, you're not, whatever that might be? Is that what you're avoiding by saying I'm not good enough? But if you weren't good enough, what would that look like? Would you go through life without apologies for your existence? Would you go through life knowing that you can meet people equally where they stand and not have to feel that somehow the people are better than you? Would you be able to stand in your own power and deliver with honesty, authenticity, clarity, focus, and not have to somehow undermine your best efforts? Because when we feel like we're not good enough, guess what? We're really good at self-sabotage. You might get so close to that success that you really wanted, and then you're going to screw it up.
Yeah.
Something will happen that takes it right away from you. And God knows I've played that game too many times in my life.
Yeah.
Where you go, okay, yeah, you've done this great work. I mean, for instance, talk about books. Books, writing a book is really like, it's a task. There's no question about it. And it's not an easy task if you're going to write one that's decent. But the bigger challenge is, how do you get people to read it?
Yeah.
And if you're going to back off of that particular task, which is the bigger task, frankly, then your book is just going to kind of fade away.
Yeah.
And I made that mistake. I wrote a really good novel that took me 12 years to write called When the Crow Sings. People who've read it and continue to read it tell me it's powerful, it's wonderful. I have a good friend who's a professor of Russian literature at Arizona State University. She said that book needed to be bigger in the world. And guess what? Jacqueline did not bother to push through on that one.
Well, we're going
It's,
to include links to all of those books in the
you
show
will.
notes. So,
You will. But my point being is that, we back off when we should be pushing forward. And that is, again, part of that insecurity of who you are. So this is what I'm saying about this fear work, is that you got to be able to stand in that space of saying, I need I can and I will do more for myself, but there's never going to be an end point. There's no there. I'm really clear on that at this point.
I love it. So, on that beautiful note, there's no there. There is an end point to this podcast conversation. I feel like people have a good grasp of what they could look forward to if they were to put their hands and their eyes on your book. The book is loaded with real life stories that really illustrate the key points that you're making, and lots of exercises that people can work through so that they can find their way through their own fears and the things that are getting in the way of them finding the life that they want. And in so many ways, and getting to know themselves in ways that maybe they've been avoiding and not even knowing that they're avoiding it, right? So, what would be the best way for somebody to get in touch with you or find out more about your work?
So they can go to the website, JacquelineWales.com
Okay.
is one thing. You'll find a lot of tools there. You can also, we're in the middle of building it right now, but by the time the podcast comes out, it'll probably be fine. It's fearintelligence.co. There you can find out more about the book. And what's happening is that when you buy the book, you can download 12 fear intelligence tools. I call it the Fear
Nice.
Intelligence Toolkit. And that's available on the new website, fearintelligence.co. And of
Wonderful.
course, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. And that's another opportunity right there.
Wonderful.
And,
Wonderful.
if there's any workshops or anything keynotes, anything like that that you think would make a difference in your life, your company's life, please reach out. I would love to talk to you.
Great. Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much for being here today and sharing not just your work today, but how it really evolved and your own story. It's very, very helpful for people to hear how things moved through you to the point you're at. It lends itself so beautifully to, I think, the groundedness with which we can absorb what you're telling us. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Tammy. This has been a pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Jacqueline Wales. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you're interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 286. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. Did you know that ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts can help this podcast reach more people? Please help me to inspire more people to move their careers in meaningful directions by clicking on the Apple Podcast button and leave an honest rating and brief review. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out, Break Through 9 Common Obstacles, and Design a Career that Fulfills You. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. You can also help sustain the podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how things are going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.